So thank you all for taking time to be part of this conversation today. And I hope you can all learn something useful. And again, I encourage you to ask any questions. You can interrupt me. Irina, if you see something in the chat and I miss it because I don't see the chat, please let me know and I will be happy to answer. Thank you in real time. Okay, so as you know, today we're here to talk about different aspects of publishing, working with editors, and maybe becoming an editor yourself at a certain part of your career. So why do you want to do any of this? I mean, publishing is obvious because you don't want to perish, right? But how deep do you want to get involved with the editorial process? That's another issue. And I really think, as the title suggests, these are the two sides of the same coin. It's very important that everybody participates in this process from both sides, as a reviewer, as an editor, as an author, because peer review is super important. So that's the only way how we can trust the actual published results. And as you know, the number of papers grows dramatically, and sometimes quality is not so good. So we all should try to participate as much as possible to make this process work. So how do you become an editor? And even before that, like what kind of editors are there and why would you want to become one? And depending on what kind you interact with, there are different ways of interactions sometimes. Of course, there are some general principles that apply to any editorial process. So most of the editors you interact with are typically volunteers. So this applies to editors of the conference transactions, which often can be published in some journals as a special issue. This could be editors in research journals, which are published by scientific and engineering societies. So the two examples I show here is Optics Express, which is published by the Optical Society, and Journal of Optics, that is published by the UK Institute of Physics. So I'm on editorial boards of both, so that's why I picked these two examples. But I'm sure you're familiar that there are many professional organizations, both in science and engineering and mixtures, and most of them publish a set of journals, and most of the editorial boards and these journals are volunteers. There are also kinds of journals which are more popular science oriented. So again, the one I'm showing here is Optics and Photonics News. So this is a magazine that is published by the Optical Society. And what they publish is not really research articles, but more like short topical reviews, news about the society. So these type of journals also have editorial boards, which are in most cases volunteers, plus actual professional editors that take care of the editorial process from the top. So most people in this volunteer position serve for 3 to 5 years. Sometimes this term can be renewed if they want it and if the editor-in-chief agrees that they performed well in the process. And then after that, they can just sort of retire, or sometimes they join another editorial board. In some cases, they get promoted to the deputy editor-in-chief or editor-in-chief positions. In some cases, they start new journals. So that's sort of the career ladder there. And other types of editors you also often interact with are editors in professional editorial positions. So these are people for whom this is a job. So this is a career path. And most often these are editors working in Nature family journals, Science family, and Cell family, but there are others too. So this is just some representative journals that you probably came across before. So these people, again, they are professionals. This is their job, so they apply for this job as any other job. And this is what they do. So typically at that point, they don't really publish themselves. And all those volunteer editors from the previous examples, they become usually active, they stay active researchers and they keep publishing all this time too. So all editors, but especially these professional editors, travel a lot because that's part of their job. Well, not during pandemic, but hopefully we're going back to normal situation. So they go to a lot of conferences and expos, and They visit universities and research centers on the way, looking at research, soliciting papers. So there is a lot of travel involved, and it also opens opportunities for people to interact with them. So keep this in mind when you attend, especially larger conferences with experts like MRS Fall, for example, that is in Boston, and I'll be talking about later. So usually they have a booth. So each journal would have a booth, and there will be representatives from the journal editors you can talk to. And that's a good opportunity to learn from them what they value, what topics they think important at the time, and maybe even pitch to them. So if you're giving a presentation at the conference, it's a good opportunity to invite them to that presentation, and maybe they will like it, and maybe it's an opportunity to publish a review article later. So get engaged with them. These people are traveling to get engaged with researchers. And they usually stay for a long time in their positions. I mean, also they can get promoted, they can go from journal to journal, but these are people, because this is a career position, they can be there for a long time. And if you develop a track record with them, so that's again an opportunity to publish, say, review articles down the road. So what kind of decisions editors make, and how this chain of decisions progresses? So I'll just show you one example, but some aspects of this chain can be missing from some journals. So not every journal has all of the positions I will show here. But one typical example could be there is an editor-in-chief. So all the initial submissions, after being pre-screened by staff for obvious garbage or inappropriate stuff, go to him or her, and then they make a decision to forward it down to the editor-in-chief, so to the deputy editor-in-chief. So these deputy editors usually cover specific subtopics in a journal. Like again, for example, in the Optics Express, my job as a deputy editor-in-chief is to cover everything that relates to the energy, optics for energy, energy materials, sustainability, and environmental optics. So all the submissions in that area will go to me first. And then other deputy editors get obviously submissions in their area. And then there are associate editors, which will be people that authors interact with mostly. So these are on the front lines of interacting with editors and interacting with authors and interacting with reviewers and making decisions. So this, again, depending on the journal. So deputy editor position can be missing, for example, and the editor-in-chief will just directly assign papers to associate editors. So they then solicit reviews for each paper, and then they make decisions based on the reviews. So this is, again, a typical situation, but some of the aspects can be missing. And really, the paper can be rejected at any step in this process, even before it ever makes to the review process. So it can be rejected by staff for some reasons before. It can be rejected by the editor-in-chief, deputy editors, but mostly decisions on rejection or acceptance come from the associate editors. So, and we'll dig a little deeper into this structure. So again, what kind of decisions you will get as an author? I guess most of you who submitted at least one paper know this. So the first one, the obvious one everybody wants to have is accept. This almost never happens on the first round of review. So the most positive is usually provisional acceptance, where reviewers ask for just tiny things to correct. Major revisions, which I would say it's probably the most typical verdict you can get on your paper, and then rejection. So this block of decisions, again, are usually made by the associate editor after review. And of course, they need to take into account the reviewer's suggestions, but the editor ultimately makes a decision. So that may be confusion sometimes. You see some reviewer was extremely positive, perhaps, but the decision is negative. So it's within the process. So the editor needs to look at all the reviews and all the other factors, and then they make this decision. So sometimes decision can be even more discouraging. It could be rejection without a review or redirection to another journal that is a common situation in societies or organizations that publish multiple journals. So they usually have them tiered, like higher tier and lower tier. And they may make this decision based on the expected impact. And they can suggest, okay, it's not high impact for our journal, but we can suggest to redirect it to a sister journal, which is still a good technical journal for publication. Rejection without review usually happens in the situations when it's a high plagiarism score, and I'll talk about it in a minute. If it's completely out of scope of a journal, that happens more often than you would think. So in that case, it's not even a decision on the technical quality at all. It's just a decision, this is not the readership, not the right readership for your paper, so don't waste time, just submit it elsewhere. And of course, if there is some obviously low quality paper that is, like, has typos in every sentence or some other issues with it. So these are the decisions that you face. And then the question usually is like to appeal or not to appeal. So technically you can appeal any editorial decision. So from the editorial point of view, I would suggest tread really carefully. Unless there is some serious critical mistake on the reviewer part, misrepresenting your results, then of course, absolutely, you need to appeal because it's not fair and the editors need to know that their decision was based on the flawed recommendation. But in many cases, it's very hard to appeal and make them change their minds, because if the recommendations come, we believe, especially 2 or more reviewers, that this is not high enough impact, it's very hard to argue against this decision. In the retrospect, you may be right and they can be completely wrong. So maybe if you get a Nobel Prize in like 3 years, you will be the last one laughing. But at the time, I think it's not worth wasting time trying to go through the appeal process, which can be long, and it will have to go through all this editorial chain again. So if it's not the paper that you think is going to be a cornerstone of your career and you are ready to die on the altar for it, I wouldn't recommend wasting time. And it's just so many journals nowadays, it's easier to go to another one. In some cases, even if the paper was rejected, you can still resubmit it again after some time. But if you do that, it may be sent for review. If you can prove in your submission letter that revisions that you made are really substantial. So it's not just like even major revisions of the original manuscript. And I've seen quite a few papers published like that in the journals I work with. But again, it doesn't mean you need to try to submit to the same journals. There are quite a few within the same tier from different publishers. So how do editors make all those decisions, rejection or sending to reviewers or acceptance? So what do they see? So they actually see quite a lot in the digital world. So you have to be very aware that your history, your track record is visible to an editor when they make a decision. So typical things that will be flagged, that when I look at a new submission, is potential plagiarism issues. I think every journal nowadays does this automatic pre-screening. And in gray, these are messages that I would typically see coming with a paper. So it could be just cross-check no concerns if the staff, in some journals, staff pre-screens this score and they just send you if there is a concern. In other cases, the editor sees the raw information, so it can come back to me saying 4% of plagiarism. This is nothing. This is usually just like references that we referenced before, or sometimes even names if it's the same like author list. Anything in double digit and higher, that is a reason for concern, and we would look. And you'd be surprised, sometimes you see like people really try to republish the same work that's already published. In some cases, it's trickier to catch. So once, for example, I had a paper that didn't trigger anything in English. It just happened that I read exactly the same paper in Russian, and I knew that it was exact copy of that. So it's not always that you will get an editor who's bilingual and can really catch things like this, but it could happen, and it's really embarrassing. So I hope nobody is going to try any of that. So one exception where it could be high score, but no reason for real concern, is when it overlaps with the thesis, like PhD or master's thesis. So usually, as editors, we make this decision like based on the university guidelines. Some universities, I know not many, but I saw cases like that. They do not allow people to include papers in the thesis like verbatim. They have to really change them substantially to avoid this plagiarism. In most cases, it's not, universities don't require that. And if we see high score, and that is because there was a thesis submitted somewhere or defended somewhere on this topic, but it wasn't published anywhere else, usually, at least in my experience, we make a decision that that's not a problem, it can go forward. So we also can see a full history of publishing in that journal for sure. In some cases, going back like decades. It's really scary sometimes to look even at your own history and you realize that this is all open information. So your track record matters. It's like, you need to be aware of that. And so again, and sometimes you can also see history of publishing in other journals. If again, those journals are part of the publishing house that is run by society or just a standalone publishing house like Elsevier or others. So in many cases, editors can see submission and publication history from other journals too. So don't spam. So I guess my message here is don't assume that they don't see it. They may not, but it's possible that people may see it. So again, what is typical information that I would see as an editor coming with a paper is it could be recent author history, like how many papers recently were accepted, how many rejected. That already sort of presets your mind, right? If you see that, say, out of 10 recent submissions, 9 were rejected, you're already very critical approaching this paper. So just be careful to avoid having bad track record like that. In some cases, also staff helps to collect additional information, for example, on the H-index of the author, where else they publish, what is their publication track in general. So it's not always, it shouldn't be taken into consideration really for each decision. So we're supposed to make a decision based on a paper. But then again, if you see really bad track record, it already makes you skeptical. So be careful about that. So again, in some cases, editorial staff can pre-screen and just the editors don't see this intermediate information, but they can still get a recommendation or red flag. If something really red flags, they will get specifics of why that happened. So how to be successful with your actual submission. So obviously, good science cannot be replaced by anything, but it's also very important to make that science to go through. And there are multiple parts of the manuscript. And of course, nobody starts from reading everything in detail, especially deputy editors or editor-in-chief. In most cases, everything we see is just an abstract. Maybe impact statement, which some journals recommend. But of course, there is no way I can read every manuscript. I constantly have up to 40 in my queue. And an associate editor will have anything from like 5 to 12, maybe in the worst cases in their queue at any given time. So you can imagine that in that hierarchy, every person who's high up, they only will look at a small part of your manuscript. So you need to make sure that that small part really tells the story well. And of course, that usually is abstract and impact statement, letter, cover letter. So depends, like if there is both cover letter and impact statement, I'm not sure a person would read both. So most likely, probably impact statement, if it's easier to see in the system. So now, table of content image. This is very important, in my opinion. And actually on the MechE ComLab website, we have a very nice article written by Andrea about importance of table of content images and how to make them and how not to make them. So the top one, for example, here is an example of a good one. So you can grasp from that image what the paper is going to be about, what is the significance. The bottom one, as you can see, I guess it's too much. So it's too much of a story to make it easy to grasp. So don't overdo it. but this stock image is an opportunity to convey your story in the easiest graphical way. So if an editor likes that, they see, okay, so there is a story here. So I do believe that this could be interesting. Just it makes it easier for them. Sometimes this is not required at the initial submission step, but if you really would like to increase your chances, I would recommend including it, because like a picture always speaks more than 1,000 words, right? And reviewer suggestions. So this is not a mere formality, and don't waste this opportunity to suggest the right reviewers. It does not mean that your paper will go to those reviewers. Of course, definitely it will go to not only them. But this is important because this is a chance to really get people who might be reviewers. And here you need to thread carefully again. So if you suggest somebody who is, I don't know, center director at Stanford or MIT or other places, it's very unlikely they have time. But if you know that their group works closely in this area, and especially if your group also worked in this area for some time and you know that people pay attention, they might be still worth including this person with the hope that they will send it down the chain in their lab to like their postdoc or student for review. Or maybe just do your homework and look, okay, I want this to go to this group, but don't suggest the PI. Suggest somebody who may actually have time to read your manuscript and act as a reviewer. You can also suggest people who you don't want to be approached, and we always honor that. So if there is really some bad blood with some other group based on prior research record, include that, and we will make sure that it does not go to these people. Okay, so how those reviewers are actually picked. So what you suggest, it plays a role, and in most cases, when I advise new associate editors, I recommend them to pick some from the list of recommended people, and then some outside of the list, sometimes like 50-50, sometimes not in equal proportion, depends. So another source is your references list. So people who did prior work obviously would make the best candidates for reviewers. And conversely, if you know that somebody works in this area and they might be reviewers, include them in the reference list. Because if they don't see their names, they are not going to be happy. So just make sure you don't alienate people before they even start reading your manuscript. So another route, as I already mentioned, a lot of people, especially with bigger responsibilities and busier lives, they would not accept themselves, but they would send it down to people in their group, to postdoc students or collaborators. And this is actually also an opportunity for you to become a reviewer as a first time. So sometimes your PI will do it automatically, but sometimes if they don't, but you want to see this process from the other side, which is very useful, you can ask them. So please, if you get papers in my research area and you don't have time to review them, please recommend me as an alternative reviewer. And we usually like that a lot because it's very hard to find reviewers. Sometimes you approach, I don't know, up to 10 people with the hope to get at least 2 people who not only agree, but also submit the reviews. So if you cannot do a review, if you just decline right away, it's totally fine, and it's very highly appreciated, because sometimes, in many cases, actually, people don't decline and they just ignore, and then it sits in the system, and it, first of all, it will send you spam reminders that, yeah, there is an invitation, you don't want that spam. But also it helps us to make quick decisions. Okay, so if all these people declined, then we are not waiting for their response, we're just asking other people. Because sometimes when you ask too many and then 6 agree, and then it's actually sometimes very hard to make decisions based on so many reviews. So again, just be cautious, because these are all people. It looks all, in many cases, impersonal, because everything is electronic. You don't really see people, but editors are people and reviewers are people. So, and it's nice to be cautious, like always, to everybody. So becoming a reviewer. why do you want to be a reviewer? It's a hard work, and in most cases not publicly appreciated, although that is changing now. But I think, I believe firmly it's totally worth it, because this is how you become a good writer, how you can publish better, because you see this from the other side. And also as a reviewer, usually you will get reviews from other people to the same paper. So when you do it first time, you may be unsure, did I do it right? How do I generally write reviews? It's not like you find reviews all over the place as examples, right? Although some journals now publish with the permission from the authors and reviewers, all the reviews and then like results of the paper based on that review. But not every journal does it, and this is a new practice. So normally you don't know how, but when you are one of the reviewers, you get recommendations of other reviewers, you get to see them. So that helps you to learn to see what people look in the paper, like what they pick on. So next time when you write your own manuscript, it makes the process so much easier for you. So if you want to become an editor eventually, which is again, I think quite good for a professional career, especially if that is career in academia that you are looking for. So then becoming a reviewer as some part of this process is absolutely essential. And don't be afraid if you are asked to be a reviewer and you don't feel like you know everything about this subject. Nobody knows everything. We don't even expect from deputy editors or associate editors to know everything about every manuscript, because there are so many, especially interdisciplinary works nowadays. So just be honest about the parts you do know and focus on those. Because again, remember, you're not the only person who's reviewing any manuscript. So if you can help the editor make a decision on certain aspects in which you are expert and make it sound in your review, and then maybe they can make a decision on other aspects from a review of another person, that's valuable for them. And also remember, everybody in the digital world, everybody has a track record. So reviewers are ranked. So when we get reviews, we rank them afterwards. And if a review is totally useless, like completely generic in 2 sentences, it will get a low rank, and it's not helpful ultimately, because you cannot make any decision based on that review if it provides no detail. So it's just a wasted time for everybody really. And also there's a track record of how many reviews were submitted, how each rank for each review. And again, it's okay to decline. Normally, once you get into a system of any journal, or in many cases, you'll get into systems of multiple publishers, you will start getting a lot of invitations, again, for the reason because it's hard to find reviewers. So it's totally fine to decline most of them. But if it's in your field and you can really help, if you accept and do it in the time allotted, that's the best scenario. Okay, there's something in the chat. Okay. All right, so that's about becoming a reviewer, and then becoming an editor. So if that's a career path that could be of interest, again, I highly recommend it. It also makes you a better researcher and a better author, obviously, like even to the next level. So again, being a reviewer is an essential part on this step, but there are other ingredients, of course, that need to come together. So the obvious one is publish. So before new editors are invited, obviously, existing editors look at their track record. So reviewing is also important from the personal perspective, because, for example, when I was promoted to the deputy editor position, I was asked for a recommendation for a person to replace me as an associate editor. And that, of course, I mean, based on general reputation of people in the field, but also on their performance as reviewers, because just because somebody is an excellent scientist, it doesn't mean they will make a good editor if they don't take seriously that part of job. So that recommendation is then often based on these 2 components. They need to be obviously experts in the field, but they also need to be good at the editorial work. And you can only find it out at that stage, most likely, how good reviewers they are. So publishing review articles also helps, because it shows you have this broad understanding of the field and different trends and perspectives in the field. So joining a professional society is always useful, and it's useful if you want to become an editor, because again, a lot of these journals are published by professional society, like American Chemical Society, American Physical Society, Optical Society, European societies, Asian societies, so all over the place. And there are always volunteering opportunities in those societies, and some of them include editorial roles, and that's a pathway to those roles. So another obvious way is to propose a special focus of feature issue. They are named differently in different journals, and serve as a guest editor. So you'd be surprised that this is actually a very viable pathway, even if you never served as an editor before. If you come up with a good idea, because we're always looking for good ideas for those feature issues, and approach, it also helps if you build a team before you even come with an idea to the editor-in-chief or a deputy editor. Build a team of other people who could be guest editors. And it also helps a lot if some of them are already associate editors in the journal you are trying to propose this to. So it builds some internal trust in the team. And just submit a proposal. So many journals have this available right on the website, like form, how to submit a proposal. You can submit a proposal for a review article. You can submit a proposal for a feature issue. Or if there is nothing like template-wise, you can still just write it to an editor-in-chief, suggesting your idea with some background, like why you think this would be a good idea, who you think could be people that you will invite to publish in this focus issue, and why you have an expertise to serve as a guest editor. And this is usually one-time thing. So usually guest, so this focus issue will have anything from 10 to maybe 50, if you are really lucky and work hard, articles. So this is one-time thing, and it gives you a flavor. Did you like the process? Do you want to be an editor? But also it helps you to build a track record if you decide that you do want to be an editor. Another way to try and some editorial work is to propose and organize a special session at a conference, because in many cases, this could be followed up by editing conference transactions. And I'll talk about a specific example later. So many of these transactions nowadays are published as research journals. So it's effectively like working an editor in a journal. So as I mentioned already, so review process used to be all in the shadows and only seen by editors. But now, just to encourage people to participate in the process, quite a lot of publications encourage these prizes or certificates for good reviewers. And again, reviewers have track records too, just like authors. So it's also very important to be courteous and professional. So I just want to finish with a couple of specific examples of how I became an editor. And then I will be very happy to answer any questions you might have. So as I mentioned, I'm on the editorial board of the Optics and Photonics News. So this is like popular science magazine. So how I got first into dealing with this magazine is we had this, I was in Ukraine at the time, so it was 2007. And I was a faculty advisor for our local student chapter of the Optical Society and SPIE. And we had this contest for optical photography and science. And it generated a lot of really nice images, as optical contests usually do. And we decided it could be a good idea to write an article and show others how you can organize things like that and what kind of results you can have. And I just wrote it and I sent it to the editor-in-chief, and he liked it and they published it. So that was my first interaction with this journal. So with the Optics Express, my first interaction was the one I already recommended to you, proposing a focus issue. So I had an idea that it could be an interesting topic on exploring different collective phenomena in photonic and plasmonic structures. And I proposed this idea to the editor-in-chief. He liked it, and he recommended a team of people to also serve as guest editors. Most of them, I think, were already associate editors in the journal, so it made it easier. But knowing what I know now, I would recommend you, if you want to go this way, build this team yourself before you propose, because it will make it so much easier and helps to establish credibility. And another example is that I already mentioned. So if you organize a special session, that provides an opportunity to become an editor for the paper submitted after the conference. So one opportunity for that is MRS Material Research Society meetings, and especially useful because fall meetings are usually held in Boston. So this is a very grassroots process, and even setting aside completely journal editing stuff, I would highly recommend trying to participate in this as an organizer at some point. So again, it's usually 4 people need to band together to put a proposal. There is an official proposal form, and it could be anything. It could be any topic you're an expert in, as long as it overlaps with the society interest in materials. And in most cases, if your proposal makes sense, it will be approved. In some cases, it will be recommended to merge with another proposal, but then it gives you a lot of opportunities to interact with people in your field, and then to also get to try to serve an editor for this special issue after the conference. Okay, so I think that is the stuff I wanted to share based on prior questions I get at conferences and on my own experience, but please ask me any other questions, because obviously there are a lot of things that I did not talk about. Thank you. Thank you. Come on, any questions? All right, so just maybe I will reiterate. Oh, how you, excellent. Thank you, Sima. How you balance the time spent being an editor with your other obligations in your career life? That's a very good question. Yeah, at some point, well, you always have to balance, but at some point, I think you realize it actually helps you more than it holds you back, because you get this access to a lot of fresh information. You see the trends. It helps you to guide your own research. And this is a very good question, because sometimes indeed, if you are not ready yet to engage on the editorial level, it may be distractive, because you may spend too much time, even if you get accepted by the journal, because especially a lot of these newer journals, they would take anybody. They would actively solicit your participation as an editor. But then in what I noticed in a lot of those journals, they want editors also act as reviewers, sort of, because it's very hard to get reviewers to even like top tier journals. But as you go down the impact factor, it gets harder and harder. So again, those positions, I think I would advise against, at least while you're working on your PhD and you are busy otherwise, because it could be a lot of work and not so much outcome. Yeah, I'm sorry I cannot give you like one clear-cut answer, but yeah, it does take time. So you need to be aware of that, and you need to be ready to read quickly. Like, you need to be prepared that the abstract is the only thing you will have time to read, and you need to be prepared to make a decision based on that. So that means, otherwise, if you have to read every paper, you will never get any of your papers done. All time will be spent just reading somebody else's papers, which is not a good time, I guess, investment. But reviewers, this is something, again, I recommend at any stage, because this is, you can control how many you accept. Of course, try to accept those that are really interesting for you, and you get to see the process from within. And it could be just once, could be twice. So, and if you are busy at a certain time, just decline every invitation at that time. So it gives you opportunity to much better control your time in the process. Okay, I also mentioned how some people will plagiarize by publishing their work in multiple languages. Out of curiosity, are there any stats on that? How frequently do you think it happens and slips under the radar because not all editors are multilingual? I think, I mean, in my career, I saw it once, but that was a really like bad case where it was directly translated, like from start to finish. I don't think that happens often. I do believe that there are more situations where some things get published, but not like the whole paper verbatim. And again, I don't think there's any real statistics on that, but also depends on the languages. You know that like there are languages in which there are so many people who are editors and authors. I think it's very hard to get away with it because like a lot of people speak Chinese and read Chinese, right? A lot of people read Russian. Maybe in some more obscure language, it's easier to get through the cracks like that, but I think it's hard to do it more than once because there is a large community that's bilingual in almost any language. Okay, do you think there is something that editors and journals can do to unify work in different languages or to have professional translators for journals? This is a hard one, yeah, because all this requires resources, right? So if the journals will start providing any kind of like language resources, somebody will have to pay for it. So either it will need to be spread over all the authors, which may not be fair, or I mean, usually I think this is the job of organizations that authors belong to, and they should provide support. And it's easier to do because it can be more targeted and focused. So if an academic institution is, say, in like Quebec, they can help with people who are speaking French but need to publish in English, or if it's in Moscow, they know they need to focus on like Russian English translators. But do it on a basis of one journal, I think it's a little hard. Now, saying that, there are some exceptions with the articles which are invited opinion and perspective articles. So this could be like nature journals, or optics and photonics news is another example. This is where the articles get heavily edited by the editors themselves, because they need to be accessible to the public, and they're edited for language and for style. So this is one opportunity. If somebody is an expert in their field, but their English is not perfect, this is where they can get help. But I don't think for research articles, there is really much that journals can do. Okay. Any other questions? Any part of the process that scares you personally? Well, apart from publishing in general. All right. Yeah, so if you think of any other questions afterwards, please email me and I'll be happy to answer if I do know the answer. And again, when you go to conferences, there is almost always a meet the editor session. So if you are still curious to hear other perspectives, because again, my perspective is limited to several journals I worked with, but there could be other things that you can learn. And just to meet those editors, because again, they are people, and especially some of them that are professional, they're in the field for a very long time. So it helps to know them, and they're always happy to answer questions. So seek out those meet the editor sessions, seek their booths at the conferences, and get engaged, and you can learn something useful through that process. All right. Chance for the last question. Okay, yeah, so thank you all for joining. I hope you did learn something useful, and please follow up with questions if you will think of something afterwards. And good luck with your publishing and becoming editors if that's something you want to. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Irina, for help with this.
Yeah, no problem. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.